I actually do think that the U.S. warnings are true, and that if Israel were to engage in a massive ground operation of Rafah the way the United States has explicitly said it doesn't want, I think that Israel would face severe consequences from its American allies. But the weapons that are being transferred now are weapons that some are part of this 10-year agreement between the two countries, and others are part of the airlift of weapons that the United States is transferring to Israel for its war against Hezbollah and Hamas. And I think that there's a misunderstanding if we link the possible invasion of Rafah with these weapons that are kind of more, if we can say this about weaponry, more day-to-day kind of transmits.
3 UN observers and a translator have been injured in Lebanon after a shell exploded near them. Israel has denied any involvement in the incident. We're joined now by Noga Tarnopolsky, a Jerusalem-based journalist. Noga, thank you so much for giving us your time.
Hi, Alexis.
What can you tell us about this shell explosion that has had UN observers get injured today?
We don't know much, and I don't even know to what extent they're injured. Initially, the reports were that somebody had even been killed. Then they kind of seemed to go back from that. I simply don't know. I do know that the Israeli army immediately issued a denial that it had anything to do with it. And we know, of course, that right now, southern Lebanon is an extremely dangerous area. But that said, this is the sort of thing that's happening, more and more in war zones. And you have people who have peacekeeper roles who are really putting themselves in great danger, no matter who left those shells there.
Now, Noga, you're talking to us from Jerusalem at the moment. What is the atmosphere in Jerusalem? Of course, this is a big weekend, not just for Christians, but for Jews and Muslims. What is the atmosphere around you?
It's sad. Yesterday was the third Friday of Ramadan, and there's a general feeling of relief, that more than 100,000 worshippers were able to go up to the esplanade of the mosques each Friday. Everything has transpired quietly. Israel has not imposed unusual limitations on those who can go up to pray, despite threats from Israeli ministers. We're approaching Passover for the Jews. There's a feeling kind of a little bit pre-holiday, but mostly it's sort of heartbreak because the festival of Purim just happened. Passover is coming, and the families of hostages feel bereft and abandoned as the country and the government mostly moves on into more festive expressions. And it's a very sad Easter for the Christians. Jerusalem has, for the first year in its history, a Cardinal of Jerusalem for the Catholics, but there are no tourists here, there are no pilgrims. Today's the festival, the fire ceremony, which has to do with the Orthodox Easter. It's a beautiful ceremony, and it's just the small local Christian community who's here. So I would say that all round, it's just a very sad festive period.
Let's look at also what is happening in Gaza itself. Al Jazeera are reporting today that the US has been approving bombs and jets for Israel amid a threat of offensive in Gaza's Rafah. Noga, the plans for possible invasion of Rafah have been around for at least a couple of weeks, 3 weeks. We have been talking about it, you and I, on the radio. Do we have anything new from the Israeli government?
Absolutely nothing. And I think that you and I have been talking about it since February, if I remember correctly. I think that this remains a sort of cudgel on the part of the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. He keeps threatening a ground invasion of Rafah. He keeps promising to his base a ground invasion of Rafah. It's become like the word he says upon waking up and upon going to sleep. But there are no military preparatives for any such things. It's important to remember that the Israeli army would have to redraft more than 100,000 soldiers to prepare for such a massive operation. It's not something you can hide. These are reservists. Nothing of this type is underway. There are also no physical preparations with materiel on the ground. So at the moment, it remains this threat. And I think that we may be misunderstanding the U.S. arms transfer, which I don't believe are connected. I actually do think that the U.S. warnings are true, and that if Israel were to engage in a massive ground operation of Rafah the way the United States has explicitly said it doesn't want, I think that Israel would face severe consequences from its American allies. But the weapons that are being transferred now are weapons that some are part of this 10-year agreement between the two countries, and others are part of the airlift of weapons that the United States is transferring to Israel for its war against Hezbollah and Hamas. And I think that there's a misunderstanding if we link the possible invasion of Rafah with these weapons that are kind of more, if we can say this about weaponry, more day-to-day kind of transmits.
And finally, Noga, since we last spoke, you and I, there has been that UN Security Council resolution demanding that immediate ceasefire in Gaza, and yet the war continues. Has Israel replied, acknowledged, taken account of the UN Security Council?
Yeah, it's sort of an amazing thing, and it's good that you're asking, Alexis. The UN Security Council actually passed a resolution that demanded an immediate ceasefire and the immediate release of all hostages. Neither of those two things has happened. Hamas thanked the UN for passing a ceasefire resolution and ignored the bit about hostages. And the Israeli government decided to use that resolution and the fact that the United States didn't veto it to openly attack the US government that is supporting it in this war. That caused a really major diplomatic crisis this week, which may be getting resolved now. But basically, the UN's call has been ignored by everybody, and Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, appears to be itching for a fight with Biden because he thinks that may help him with his local popularity.
Noga, as always, thank you so much for giving us your time. I really appreciate it. Thank you.